Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Earth Exchange Café. We meet here once a month together to speak with people who are writers, artists, activists, thinkers, and doers, musicians, people whose work in really looking at hard times and difficult places and finding and making beauty there inspires us at Radical Joy for Hard Times. So we invite you to imagine yourself as you are in a favorite cafe, a beautiful, welcoming place where there are books and magazines to read, where you have your tea or your coffee or your chocolate, and you're settling back to relax. There's perhaps music playing, but just softly enough so that it doesn't interfere with conversations. I mean, there are rugs on the floor, perhaps rugs on the wall even, and paintings, really good paintings by local artists. And you settle in, you relax, and you settle back as we prepare to have a conversation with our friend today, who is bringing a lot of really new and exciting ideas to the world about climate change. And to introduce her is our co-host, my colleague, Harriet Sams.
Thanks, Trebi. Well, welcome everybody. It was a beautiful introduction to the cafe. It is my delight and joy to introduce Steffi Bednarek to the cafe today. And Steffi's blurb on her website says she works at that intersection between climate change, complexity theory, and the human psyche. She supports leaders, teams, organizations in developing their competencies and frameworks of care needed to face complexities without collapsing into inaction, to think trans-contextually without losing focus, and to nurture sustainable development while neither denying or amplifying the challenges ahead. In other words, my words perhaps, Steffi offers that place of inquiry where everything's collapsing, yet something is still being held on to in that team, in that leader, in that organization. I've been it's been an honor to work with Steffi for the last few years, occasionally on and off for the Climate Psychology Alliance. So it's just such a joy to introduce you today to everybody, and welcome, Steffi.
Thank you so much. And I'm actually really excited about this conversation. I have listened to quite a few of your Earth Exchange cafes. And I said it before, I absolutely love the work of Radical Joy for Hard Times. So it's exciting to be here and to have a conversation with you.
And from our point of view, that familiarity, that recognition, I think it goes both ways. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work with climate psychology, and what it is about your work particularly that resonates with what you've explored and understood about the RadJoy processes that we offer?
So in a funny way, throughout my whole life, I always found myself on the edge of something. So interested in psychology, became a psychotherapist, but found myself on the edge of it because I was also really interested in politics and active in worked on policy with different governments, and that didn't quite fit. But also the work with organizations didn't quite fit because I was interested in philosophical issues and saw through an ecological lens. And so it has taken an enormously long time to suddenly feel, well, actually, instead of trying to bring what's on the edge into the mainstream, maybe there is something about the edge dwellers that need to bring the attention to the edge rather than to the center, if that makes sense. And so there's something about Radical Joy for Hard Times that also seems to have that countercultural edge to it, literally taking people in the direction where it's an invitation to go to the places that we may shy away from. And in that sense, I think there's an enormous overlap and familiarity as well. And for me, the beauty in that is that we find each other. The more we talk about our work and our ideas and our sensitivities and vulnerabilities on the edges, the more we find, I think, people who work in lots of different disciplines who also dwell on the edges. And suddenly there's this sentence from Prigogine that says that in a sea of chaos, you try and find the small islands of coherence. And so for me, that's a sort of recognition that maybe the coherence that we've created in individual disciplines, psychologists, economists, politicians, so incredibly segregated, where we don't necessarily always explore the overlap we have. And suddenly I find myself talking to people from all sorts of different backgrounds and feel like, oh my God, we've got so much in common. And often it's people who have either chosen to be on the edge or pushed on the edge because their interest is wider than this single profession. So I don't know if you kind of can relate to that.
I certainly can. And yeah. Yeah, I loved what you just said about either choosing to be there or being pushed there. And I'm just reflecting about that, about with the Rad Joy process. You know, a lot of it feels like a bit of both. You know, that you'd no choice about, it feels like on a community level, on a personal level, no choice about what's happening to the world in lots of ways. There's a powerlessness. But then there is a choice, isn't there, of turning towards. And it's like two things. You either dwell on the edge because you've no choice, or you dwell on the edge because you choose it. You know, I wonder whether in your experience you've found that sort of and how communities, how organizations maybe are meeting that kind of challenge in your experience.
I don't know if I quite get your question, but just spontaneously what comes to mind is that for me, this turn towards what we might shy away from or what is not the shiny thing in the center, for me is also quite related to trauma work. I don't know why I made that connection, but that's what's come up for me. And that too, if you go into an organization, even if it's an organization that when you're on the inside feels quite a traumatized organization, if you say, I'm going to work on trauma, hardly anybody will turn up. Or if you talk about grief, for instance, people find it really important, but often won't turn up because there's, it's just so unsupported culturally that there's not enough ground there. It starts to feel scary. So I'm probably going completely off piste from what you asked me, and you probably just need to repeat the question. But so I find it really important to bring the attention not just to the work I want to bring or the work that seems important, but how can the ground, the context be prepared to be ready for the work? For people to kind of even consider turning in a direction that is not necessarily invited by the overculture. So is that?
Well, it's so interesting, isn't it? That I can ask anything and you can riff on it as much as you like. It's about that, yeah. If in your experience you've met that, you know, being torn apart by either having no choice, which is that trauma kind of idea of, you know, this has happened, And then this preparing the ground, which is really what I'm feeling is coming up, that there, yes, it's like I have no choice, but I do have a choice.
Yes.
This reminds me also, I mean, this question that Harry asked in your response, Steffi, it makes me think of something that you said. I think it was, I can't remember where it was, but you wrote about how sometimes, you know, we all hear that the way to snap out of, or at least move beyond climate anxiety, is to do something, to take action. And you have written that, well, maybe that is good in some instances, but in some instances it might be another way of running away, which I think is kind of similar to how to what we're talking about here. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yes, I'm actually just writing about that for publication. So I think there's truth in we absolutely need to take action. We're just coming looking in the rear mirror towards New York Climate Week, and it was like, it's time for action. So it's yet another call to kind of take action, and well, we're going in the wrong direction, really. And often positivity, hopefulness, and action are brought up as a way of dealing with climate anxiety. And there's also some research that shows that people feel better once they engage in some action. But, and so there's the but, so it's, I don't deny that we need to take action, but it's what kind of action? And that's where I think it starts to get very confusing, because the actions we need to take actually need to be taken by governments, by businesses, definitely by the fossil fuel industry. So where does that leave individuals who feel like when they go to work are actually part of the problem? And so then it may make us feel better to then join a community group and to take some action. But very quickly, and I don't want to dismiss that, and I don't want to dismiss that is important and that can be part of how we support ourselves. But also Rosemary Randall and Paul Hoggett, two climate psychologists, have done some research where they showed a sort of arc where often people can pinpoint at what point the information and all the horrendous statistics have started to land in their body. And this horrendous feeling of, oh my goodness, when it properly lands. And the horror of it all. And if we then bypass staying with it and allowing the reality of the situation to really undo us, to undo our business as usual, and to undo everything that we've taken for granted, so the kind of familiar, and very quickly jump to action, the action is often action for action's sake. And it doesn't necessarily lead to the kind of change that we need. But also we need to be in this in the long run. And so the action is unlikely to show some immediate results. And so a lot of people start to burn out. Because and often as well, there's a part in us that is quite heroic, that wants to save the world, that wants to save the planet. And so the results just don't show. And so there's a collapse just a little later. And so for me, it's a both and, not an either or. And their grief, hopelessness, or even a time of stillness are often seen as something that is entirely negative, when actually we also know that staying with that can make us larger. We start to see things differently. And that may mean a kind of maturation process where every single decision I take may be slightly different, because I don't have to deny the horror of it all anymore. I can both look, I can act, but my action is now no longer dependent on a positive outcome. That was a but so that's the sense I make of it.
Wow. Fascinating.
And how then, with the psychology of that, and that has absolutely come up, and there seems to be maybe a sort of a new wave of people who have experienced burnout, especially after, the school strikes with Greta Thunberg, and then we're a few years down the line now, where we have this sort of both and situation that you describe, where people are maybe connecting more to community-oriented action, and at the same time understanding that this may not make any difference. So have you come across that? And also, just to bring it back to Rad Joy's process, what would that be an ideal place for this kind of practice, perhaps? What would your thinking be around that?
So what I think is often missed, I think we often still work within polarities. So if I take action for a charity, an activist group, whatever it is, there's a risk that I start to identify as what I'm doing is all good, and what they are doing there is all bad. And so there's a risk of repeating the fragmentation that is part of the system already, and that I may become blind to how I'm also colluding, how I'm also repeating the same things, now just for a charity, or in my own behavior, how I may also fuel something. And so for me, it's incredibly important to stop for a moment and to have a more complex picture. And one of the tools that I have started to explore, and that very much comes from psychotherapy, is excuse me, so internal family systems, but also Gestalt therapy and different kinds of therapies talk about parts. And so whether I'm an activist or whether I work within the oil industry, I'm neither all good or all bad. And so that we can explore individually which parts of me are really aligned to the culture of harm and the culture of uncare. And I don't think we can live in Western culture without having at least some aspects of that want to be blind, willfully blind, to the violence that we're part of just by living in this culture. So there's no way of just being all good. But also people who work in industries that may be, well, not just maybe, that are very much at the heart of what needs to stop, are also not all bad. So I also need to look at how they may also care, in order to be able to have a dialogue. And so then your question in terms of Rad Joy, I would like to actually give that to you and say, what overlap do you see? How is there correlation between that?
Trebi, you want to answer that?
Yes, well, I think, as you were saying in the beginning, nothing can be done about anything until we look it square in the face. whether it's a bad medical diagnosis, or whether, for example, as we're looking at in the United States right now, this massive hurricane Milton coming in, and there are some people in the barrier islands of Florida who just are going to stay in their homes and hope it doesn't hit. And it's going to hit. And it's also true of climate change. We can't, until we look at it, we can't do anything about it. And yet, so a colleague and I for 2 years have been doing a program called Earth Hospice Rights. And the aim is, it's on Zoom, it's every 2 weeks on Zoom. The aim is to both look at a particular aspect of climate change, whether it's actually ecological, social, emotional, and also at the same time to say, okay, and what is the beauty that we find? It's not always about beauty that you find in the situation. Like if your home is destroyed in a wildfire, you can't go back and say, oh, look, first, not right away, you can't go back and say, oh, look at how lovely it is. Look at how pretty the ashes are. My entire life is gone. But there may be other ways of finding beauty under those circumstances, like somebody at the refuge center gives you a meal card, the actions, or the fact that you wake up in the morning after your home has been destroyed and you hear the birds singing. So I think being grounded both in the beauty and in the reality, which is frightening, outrageous, scary, and knowing that both are valid. It's like if you're looking at the horror of climate change or anything other ecological issue, doesn't mean you can't see beauty. And if you're seeing, it doesn't mean you're a strange, weird, bad person. And then on the other hand, if you're admiring something, it doesn't mean you can't also be aware of the damage and the destruction. So I think it's really true of just all kinds of circumstances that we can't move forward until we look at what's really there.
And if just add to that, in terms of what I have enjoyed being a participant in Rad Joy, is the turn towards the more than human. So to not just see everything from a human perspective. And that even when I sit in wounded places, or, like I was just thinking, there's a writer who wrote about seeing beauty in broken places. That something beautiful can come back. So the relationship doesn't need to be broken. And I can listen. And for me, that's true for trauma as well. If I turn towards trauma, these places don't just suck the sort of soul out of us. There's also wisdom in these places, and there's relationship and beauty and love and intimacy that can be experienced when we turn towards them.
And almost always is, I would say.
Yeah.
People do experience a new kind of love for a place after they've spent time there.
So my question next would lead on from what you said about finding the other than human narratives about everything that's happening, or whatever is very present for that person, for that group, for that company, for that organization. And I wonder how that translates in your work to the corporate boardroom or to the leadership, organizations that are very humanistic and come from a paradigm that is unstable, to put it mildly. What's your experience of that?
It really varies. I work with such a diverse group of people. It varies massively. Depends on the contract, of course, as well. Obviously, there's a tradition of taking leaders into nature. Often it's connected with quite extreme experiences like hiking in the Himalayas, or, sort of peak experiences. As far as I know, but I may be wrong, but the last time I saw research on that is that it doesn't necessarily translate to any kind of different kind of business decisions. And it's, again, this fragmentation. It's like I take you into a completely different context and you discover something that may even be quite moving. But then you go back into the context, and of course the context swallows you up again. There's certain things, even if as individuals we want to, if we're enveloped in a system and the system doesn't change, it just starts to be subsumed again into the grooves of and the patterns. So for me, the work needs to be slower rather than really dramatic 10 weeks. And what I find, and I'm experimenting with that. I think that slowing down is needed, and sometimes it needs to be an emotional engagement. And for me, it's just that needs to be a flocking into nature, especially not like the last remaining wild places. So that can just be anywhere outside. I've worked with city planners where we ask them to actually just sit in spots within the city and to see what they notice. But it can also be an engagement in the imagination, and often that is really moving for people. So you can also visit a place that you know, whether wounded or not wounded, and have a very active relationship and engagement with it, and find out something new, a new perspective, by engaging with it in the imaginal. So I don't have a definitive answer. It's just experimentation of what works in which context. And yeah.
So could you say more about what you mean? Give us some examples of what you mean when you say engaging with in the imaginal.
Yeah, so for instance, I worked very recently in a university. And so what I got people to experience is how our very meeting was already choreographed by the building that we were in. How the building, the walls, the tables, the chairs, and the way they were set up were already saying this is acceptable here and this is not acceptable. So nobody needs to sit us down to say, this is the part of your capacity as a human being that doesn't belong here. It's already in the furniture, in the way the
oh. Wow.
And so we start to relate to each other, and we think this is personal, individual choice, but it's not. The choices have been made by the architects and by the history and the colonial imperial history of universities, and it's all there in that moment. And so I get people to experience that and to notice how what's allowed, what's not allowed. And then I ask them to think about a place that is the opposite of that. Where is the part that is exiled within that room? Where would that place, where would be a place where they experience that to be welcomed? And that's an engagement in the imagination, because I can't ask them to kind of revisit a place of their childhood. And often there's a real embodied response to that. So they're in the room, but they have permission because they're engaging with a place where they have actually experienced a permissive environment, a welcoming environment. Mm-hmm. And there's this, we have these two parts, this juxtaposition. But once you have visited and remembered, literally remembered. Something has been woven into it. It's subtly disruptive of all of these rules that are insidious, that we don't even pay attention to. So our awareness is not there.
Mm.
And then often a different conversation is possible. People suddenly feel like more of themselves can be brought in. And I think that's really important.
That's such an interesting and beautiful way of describing that process of, you know, what's allowed, what's not allowed. And it strikes me as very much aligned with the Earth Exchange itself, actually. You know, here we are at this quarry. What's allowed? Well, indignation, anger, blame, rage, you know, noticing all of the things that we bring in a cultural kind of expectation. And then it's the land itself is, you know, given permission, go explore the land and see whether the land can help you find that part of you that's actually been disenfranchised, that's been orphaned somewhere. So it's, yeah, and then bring it in and see what it is. I'm so drawn to how you do that, and feels very aligned.
Yeah, and it's what strikes me too about it is that what you're giving to people is a message that no matter where you are, you're in a place, you know, and if you're having a meeting in a room where there's a large conference table, a long rectangular conference table with chairs all around it that don't really move, that is a place that is dictating how you're going to be with one another. And it's fascinating. I mean, it's, in a sense, it's so obvious, but we just don't, as a rule, bring it out into the open. I love it.
Yeah, and you know, I have talked about this on some podcasts before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. I was invited into a really high stakes climate meeting, and when we were still chatting outside of the room, people were lively, voices went up and down, people talked about their children, about being carers for elderly parents. So there was quite a lot of life happening and relationship. And then it became time to go inside, and there was a really large round table with microphones, and other people sat in chairs around, and it was already clear who sat at the table, who, like, the whole hierarchy of it was already written into just the chairs and the whole setup. But what happened is that automatically, and including myself, my voice became monotonous. It's like, and now we're professional. And
Right.
professional means I no longer move, I become very still. I speak with a very authoritative voice now because I say something very serious, which has to do with numbers and statistics and evidence-based practice. And so it became so clear that suddenly there was this narrowing of what was permissible in order to be professional. And it was such an impoverished conversation. And I noticed it, but it felt that would be the unsayable. That would mean if I now bring attention to that, that would be so out of the script and breaking with what's acceptable, that it would be so easy to just class me as a hippie, as sort of person who doesn't understand professional practice, disruptor, tree hugger, whatever it is. So it's so easy to just, anybody who says, well, maybe we could do this differently, where we can bring in more of our humanity, would, and again, nobody sat us down and briefed us. This is how you need to behave. It was written into the building, into the kind of ways we dressed, into the etiquette. And I think that's also ritual. That's a ceremony where it's a really death-bringing, a deadening ceremony. And I think there's so many deadening ceremonies that we do without thinking about it.
That's a fascinating place. And before we go into deadening ceremonies, because I think that that's going to be very juicy, there's something that you've been saying that strikes me about exploitation of space and exploitation of land. So when you were saying about the away day, there's a corporate hike, or they go white water rafting. Yes, they're in nature, but they're exploiting it for whatever it is that they're getting out of it. And it's almost like the boardroom is also the same, but in a kind of shadow way. It's like, this is why it was architecturally designed, so that we can exploit it, so that only parts of us come to be present. And if I were, I work outdoors a lot, and if I were to go to a whitewater rafting and not conform to how I was meant to be behaving, and actually said, this is exploitative, what do the salmon say? I wonder how that would go. And there's something very similar. They're in very, very obviously very different places in the world, but there's something very similar about that kind of truth telling, the disruptor energy. That's about relationship.
And isn't it interesting that anything that is about connection and listening and widening into, like, people are mums and dads very often too, and they are professionals in whatever building they work. But there's something that if we bring in the ordinary, the washing up and the kind of being a mom or being a dad or being a carer, or, people who are addicts or musicians or dancers or poets and leaders somewhere. It's like we're not just this one thing, but that it's seen as so unprofessional to widen. And that's insane. And so it's those meetings that are reducing, where we talk about climate agendas. And so what chance have we got for different outcomes?
So tell us more then about a death ritual in that context.
Well, for me, that is it. It's like we are trying to have conversations about how we regenerate life out there, but we're doing it by reducing life in the meeting. And so how can that be going well? I just can't see that. So if I don't allow myself to be a fully alive human being that is sensing and smelling and feeling, and that kind of is aware that our nervous systems adjust to each other, whether we're aware of it or not. So how can I kind of come to a decision that is in tune with life? And I think we do it all the time, and it saddens me enormously how we teach our children to be okay with that. I think this deadening ritual starts very early, way before school, but school is a really good example. There's like, doesn't matter whether you're hungry at 10:15, food is then. You're thirsty, well, now is not the time to drink. You want to run around, well, now is the time to sit and raise your hand quietly. It doesn't matter whether it's snowing out there. We're doing math now. And so for 4-year-olds to learn this, to learn how to sit still and raise their hand quietly, I think is a tragedy.
I agree.
I want to switch the subject a little bit and talk about the book. There she is, Climate Psychology and Change, edited by Steffi Bednarek and featuring authors like Francis Weller, Bayo Akomolafe, and Harriet Sams, to name but a few of wonderful authors in this book. So I think it would be great to hear from both of you on this. Harry, your experience of writing about Radical Joy for Hard Times, and Steffi, how you found all these authors and what you had in mind as you put this edition together.
Harry,
Shall I go first, or Steffi, or do you want to go first?
You go first.
Well, writing it seemed quite straightforward. I think I probably had an easier job than other writers because Steffi asked me specifically to write about rad joy processes and the offerings. So I knew what I was going to write about, and it was just about making it readable and making it applicable, making it, I think for me, the big thing, I think in climate and psychology spaces, for me personally, one thing that I always want to do is bring application. I'm activism is part of it, but I think in this context of how do we apply this thinking? How do we apply this sort of edge dwelling, this turning towards the uncomfortable, staying with the trouble, in the words of Donna Haraway, and so that for me was the thing that I wanted to get across the most. And obviously with the design of the Attending to Place program, which is longer than the sort of 1 day Earth Exchange, it sort of wrote itself. I just wanted to get it across. So I was very glad when Steffi asked me to write it. And at first it was co-written with Sasha, who started the project with me, but didn't carry on with that. But it was really lovely to sort of just review it and to kind of just to say this is how it feels, this is how it's been experienced, and it's not over yet. That this is how it's been so far. Now go and take it. Now you've read it, off you go and take it, and that's been a real joy. So yes, it feels like a conduit for me to getting this work across, which has just been very special. So you can tell us more, Steffi, about how you did get all these people together, all these different voices saying what they say.
So I can't even remember what year it was, but I was invited to guest edit a special edition on climate change for a psychotherapy journal. And I just knew that I didn't want to do it in the way that this is traditionally done, by putting out just a call who wants to write something for this. And so I thought about how can this be more organic? So talking about death-bringing rituals, it's like, how can we bring a bit of life into this? And so I decided to see whether I could actually be joined by some people, and for the call not to be a cold call, but start with a conversation. And so I invited 4 different other therapists who all have a slightly different angle to join me. And so Bayo and Frances Weller and Sally Weintraub, who's a climate psychologist, and Mary Jane Rust, who's an ecotherapist. We had a conversation which was not recorded. A lot of the people in that conversation would ordinarily have their own kind of groups to talk to. But everybody was really happy to just have a conversation. And for me, not to moderate the conversation, but just to sit together with the question, what's the role of psychotherapy in a time when the familiar is dying? And to allow silences and to listen for what might want to come into this space. So the invitation was not just for people to talk about what they usually talk about, but to really listen to each other and see what ideas are sparked, but also what sits in the spaces in between, in the silences. And so the agreement was that we would have no expectations of that conversation. So we could just say this was an interesting conversation and that's that. But everybody was quite happy then afterwards for me to just take out some themes that emerged. And there were some very clear themes. And so these themes were then the invitation for people to come and join in. It's like, okay, we've had a conversation. Can you join? Can you bring what you do and kind of widen it? And that was the book. It was just so incredibly easy. I put a call out. Some people responded to the call, but some people I invited personally. It's like, who talks about something similar? And so it just grew, and you were one of the people who immediately responded. And so this is where now the book is published. We're having a conversation. I really feel like it needs to be in the aliveness of conversation is really important. So it's, I think, a really interesting book, but I think it needs to be affecting people, and I want people to talk about it. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. And now that the long and winding road that has taken you from that first conversation through the editing process, through the publication process, and out into the launch, now that that's kind of, you know, moved into a new development, how's that sitting right now? How's that applicability working out? What's going on now?
I'm surprised how many people in fields that I thought would never engage with a book like that, how many people have actually contacted me and said, oh, I'm reading your book and I work in banking, or I work for an insurance company, and it's very surprising. So for me now, it's okay, so how do we, for me, it's a practice. I feel very much like I need to relearn certain things, and including relearn how to be in community, how to be in relationship. And so I need others for that. And so I found it, the title of the book is Climate Psychology and Change. So I founded the Center for Climate Psychology and Change. And I invited a lot of the contributors to the book to also offer their work. So offer workshops, offer conversations, we'll offer some events. I'm just working on this whole calendar, and in the next month, there will be much more on the website as well. And my hope is for there to be a huge variety where people can just dip in, and if they want to listen to a talk, they may want to deepen and do a workshop. But if they want to go even deeper in a couple of subjects, we kind of are in conversation that people also offer more substantial trainings. And the first person who kicks this off is Francis Weller. So he's going to give a talk in November, on the 15th of November. That will then be followed by a workshop. And then for people who want to do grief facilitation training, they can sign up for that too.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and so my hope is for that to be transcontextual, so to also then bring in people who talk about systems change and ecology and journalism, and people who may work in agriculture, so that we have this weaving.
Mm-hmm. It's about time. I remember I have a sister who's a decade older than me, and I remember when she was at university in the 1980s, and she was doing animal sciences, and she came back and she said, I don't understand it. There's a department over there, and there's a department over there, and there's my department, and they don't talk to each other. How can that be? You know, and that's one of those deadening rituals, you know. So as an 18-year-old, she was seeing like we're all in these separate silos. We're at that very precise moment in the 80s where we really needed to start talking to one another, to deeply listen, to open up a book that had multiple voices and multiple ways to deepen into those voices and what they're saying. We all shut down. So it seems so timely. I have a final question. I don't know, Trebi, whether you've got any more questions to ask. But my final question, I suppose, is a personal question. If you're happy to explore that, but I know that you have done the Rajo practice a few times. What is it about the Rajo process for you, within all the context of your professional life, but you as personally, that has mattered the most?
So the very first time I did it, I found it really important how clear it was. This is not about fixing. This is not about sitting in a place and following the heroic narrative of I'm going to do a campaign. And I found that really important because it helped me to deepen into actual relationship. And the other thing I found important for myself is that it doesn't employ a psychological map, where the attention is all, the invitation also isn't about, and this will fix you as well, or this will be good for you, or this will, kind of promise that you're also working on your own wounds. But of course you do. But it's very much in that space in between. And I think it encouraged me to not just have this kind of open relationship in beautiful places, but to go to something that a place that I recoiled from. And I found it astonishing to, Trevor, you talked about the importance of beauty, to actually see how much life there was. And how much beauty there was, and how I felt nourished and fulfilled by the contact with this place. Mm. And so there's a friend of mine who lives in the Lake District and who's an artist and philosopher, and she did an art project around Sellafield nuclear reprocessing plant. And she spent time there in Sellafield. And one thing she talked about is actually we need to turn towards these places because we need to take care of them. But we can't fix them. So her name is Wallace Heim. And she talks about a care that needs to be lots of generations down the line.
Yeah.
And that certain places are so wounded. And I think that happens with transgenerational trauma as well, that we need to work on the trauma. And we need to know how to take it into ourselves in order to know which care to extend outwards. Because otherwise the care we offer is not attuned to the actual reality of the trauma there is. So I think we have to become large and supported and networked enough to take this in so that the right response of beauty can come out. But it's not going to fix, because if I talk about nuclear waste, it is important for the survival of a lot of species that lots of generations extend that level of care. But without having the success of I've done the heroic act and I saved the place.
Mm. Mm. Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Steffi, so much. And I really urge everyone to get the book, Climate Psychology and Change. It's filled with really wonderful and different perspectives on this subject that's so difficult and so present for all of us, whether we acknowledge it or not. So thank you, Steffi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harry.
Yeah.
And
before we exit the cafe, I would like to make an announcement that one of our guests a year ago, Professor Tim Darvill, who gave a talk about the contested landscape around Stonehenge, which he was an expert on, sadly passed away last weekend. And I do urge you, if you are able to look at his video that was posted a year ago on YouTube. It's also available on the Facebook page, just to immerse yourself in his deep compassion. He was a very a man very attuned to the sacred, and had a real open willingness to offer support to people through his love of a very sacred landscape, which is Stonehenge. So yes, just holding his family in our thoughts. And with that, I just want to thank you again, Steffi, for your wonderful contribution. Trebi, would you like to turn the lights out and close the door?
Yeah, yes. So it's time for the cafe to close for this particular time. We don't yet know who our guest is for November, so that's why I'm not announcing it right now. But there will be one. So the music has been turned off in the cafe. The lights are going on and off, letting everyone know it's time to gather their things together. The cups are off of the table, and it's time to push back our chairs, gather our things together, and say goodnight to our friends, and leave the cafe to return next month for another conversation with an inspiring person at the Earth Exchange Café. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you for being here.